It's one thing to say you're setting out to make a difference, but when they come and interview and they meet people, they really feel that this organization is set up to do that. And I often, you know, it has grown organically, so it's difficult to really pick elements apart. But I think some elements of it are sort of passion across the team for what we're doing, but also a focus on education and educating ourselves. And that, I talk about, taking people out to a conference and having them discuss the products, but we've also had a couple of past presidents of the American Society of Breast Surgeons fly them over to talk to the whole company and take everyone through, basically the development history of the standard of care in breast cancer in terms of surgery. And, even our admin understands, what does this ultrasound look like? Why is this one concerning? Why is this one not concerning? Not that they're going to go out and become, ultrasonographers or anything, but we had this culture where we valued the space in which our customers were, understanding and learning how they do what they do, and understanding how we are a part of that process of advancing their practice.
Welcome to the LabToMarket Leadership Podcast. Too many advanced science and engineering companies fail to deliver their innovations from the lab to the market. We are on a mission to change that. My name is Chris Reichhelm, and I'm the founder and CEO of DeepTech Leaders. Each week, we speak with some of the world's leading entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, and policymakers about what it takes to succeed on the lab-to-market journey. Join us. If you're an entrepreneur, or if you're an investor, if you're any kind of stakeholder with an interest in getting companies from lab to market, you need to listen to this week's episode. This week, I'm talking to Eric Mays, who's the CEO of a company called Endomag. Endomag in 2010 were a spinout from University College London and the University of Houston. As CEO, Eric has been responsible for leading their development, to having solutions in the market, and an eventual exit to Hologic just this past year for $310 million. This is going to be a special episode. We get to talk to a CEO who has done most of the journey. Now, Eric is an unusual CEO in the UK for a startup, and I'll tell you why. He's unusual because he has a lot of startup experience. Okay? Eric has started 2 of his own businesses in the advanced materials area. One was called Nanomagnetics, and the other one was called Apoclara. And he's also been part of the management team of yet another materials business called Cambridge Display Technologies, or CDT. One of the first, if not the first, Cambridge spinout to float on the NASDAQ. And so Eric brings with him, or brought with him, lots of experience, lots of skills and talents when he joined Endomagnetics. And I want to find out from him what that journey was like, the different phases and stages and the milestones, the key obstacles. What were the useful experiences and skills that he brought into that role? What were the skills that were developed in him while he was there? What kind of different skills, experience, and talents did he bring into that team along the way? What surprised him about that journey? What did it take for them to get their solutions to market? How did they know when they reached product market fit? And what were the key ingredients that led to their eventual exit? All of these things and more I want to discuss with Eric today. This is going to be a great episode. I hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. Eric Mays, thank you for joining me.
Chris, it's great to be here.
You've just had your win, your exit. Endomag, I think this summer, announced the final acquisition by Hologic for $310 million. How does that feel?
Feels a lot of ways. It feels great, obviously, but it's kind of a mix of emotions because it seems like it's the end of something, the start of something new. Is it everything that we all hoped for. Partly, always hope for more,
Yeah.
but in an average or full sense, it was a great outcome, and really pleased with it.
What stage did you get the company to at the point of exit? Like, where was it
So,
in terms of its development and so on?
so we were on the path to profitability during this year. So in terms of the overall revenues, I think our revenues in 23 were about 30 million pounds post-channel revenues, and this year we were still on target for 40. Um, and one of the things that we'd done to help really inflect our growth curve was to transition from basically a channel relationship, a sole channel relationship, to partly direct. So in January 23, we transitioned to being direct in our major European markets, and that really helped impact our growth. It's a big management challenge. Happy to talk about that. But I think some of the big milestones that we achieved this year is, we've treated over 500,000 patients on a global basis in over 45 countries. So, huge clinical impact, significant revenue impact, grown the team to, over 150 employees across 5 countries. And and we're getting to profitability. So it was, a nice point to have the acquisition.
Was there a particular reason to sell now?
So they say that companies are bought and not sold, and that was very much the case in our journey. I'd taken that to heart. That people had told me that before. Plan for growth, don't plan for an exit, and it was just that we happened to have some approaches in the middle of 2023. Two separate approaches, independent. We were running a process, but once we had 2 bidders, we decided to create a competitive environment for them. But didn't run a big process outside of those. They were serious bidders, fit strategically, knew both of them, competed with one of them, which is Hologic, who ultimately acquired us. And but we weren't setting out to be sold. And it happened at the right time as well. I think our investors, as in many DeepTech plays, it had been a long journey. 14 years for me, and we'd had strong backing, obviously committed to our growth, but good approaches at the right time in the market.
It was time. Yeah, I get that. So I am really interested in taking you kind of all the way back to the start and working our way forward, because you're one of the few, particularly in the UK, that has been on the full lab to market journey.
Yeah.
And not only, getting the products out in the market, which is what most companies hope to achieve, but actually working up towards a path of profitability and then ultimately getting the exit as well. So you've been on the whole journey. You are why we made this podcast, to to learn from people like you. So for the for the entrepreneurs and leaders that are out there trying to go on this journey now, I want to understand as much as I can about it so that people can benefit. 2010 is when you join. And at what stage is Endomagnetics, as I think it was called back then? At
Correct.
What stage was the business when you joined?
So from a technology readiness level, it was sort of a 7, 8, if you do those things. But I think TRLs are technology. It's not a business readiness scale.
Yep.
So the company was originally a spinout of 2 universities, so the University College London and the University of Houston. So back when the Department of Trade and Industry existed, they had sprinkled some money on academics between the UK and the state of Texas to collaborate. And the founders came together to develop a system initially in the diagnostic space. So UCL has some expertise in use of magnetic nanoparticles in human health for contrast agents or MRI, et cetera. And the University of Houston had expertise in superconductors, in particular, superconducting-based sensors. And so they thought they'd do some diagnostic play. Unlike many academic founders of companies, they actually spoke to some customers. And the customer feedback had been, listen, we don't need any more sensitivity in this area. This isn't so interesting to us. And then they managed to happen across a surgeon who said, well, there's this new technique being developed to assess the stage of breast cancer that looks like it's going to become, set as the standard of care, and it relies on radioisotopes. And your magnetic technique might be more available, might solve some of the problems around that. And so that's what got them started. The Technology Strategy Board, or Innovate UK now, as it was then with the TSB, gave a grant of about £250,000 to the company. That helped convince the tech transfer office to put in some money and to fund the two academic founders and one of their partners who was affiliated with the university. So it was basically three academic founders, a tech transfer office that between the two universities, UCL business took precedence because they put in the money. And so it became, despite the cross-Atlantic start, became a UK balanced organization. And basically the remit was come in and help develop this company and start the early part of that journey. Take this innovation that had some clinical evidence, take it, get it approved, get it into the market.
Yes.
And that was kind of where we stood.
And that was it. Okay, so that was the mandate.
That was the mandate.
But
what they had done, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, please.
What they had done, as well as they had engaged with a surgeon, a breast cancer surgeon, who had used a developmental system and shown sort of proof of concept in 10 patients in a sort of paired context. So there was clinical evidence that looked compelling based on 10 patients. They had a prototype device, and this Technology Strategy Board grant was a collaborative grant such that it involved the university, but also not clinical research, but contract manufacturing, a CMO, contract manufacturing organization called Integrated Technologies Limited, to basically productize their prototype and help them get through some of the early regulatory hurdles.
Were you their first CEO?
I was their first CEO. I think the UCLB partner had acted as sort of de facto CEO early on, and it was sort of in between them and the founders to structure those agreements with ITL to get the grant in the first place. But they'd done a bit of a search, but because of my background, that maybe we'll talk a little bit about. I felt right for this opportunity at the time, even though I was joining as, in effect, employee number one.
But it sounds like they had done, what's very interesting about this is it sounds like they had done an awful lot of work prior to almost effectively starting the business. So to get to TRL 7-ish, before they've really started on the outreach, the market outreach, and the building or development of the rest of the business, organizing the trial, even if it's a relatively small one, but taking that on board. So that's quite unusual in my experience.
I think, yeah, and in my experience as well. And that was one of the things that was compelling for me, is they had done so much work. And sort of a funny irony of this all is the founder from UCL, I'd actually had come visit my very first startup called Nanomagnetics. We would have a lecture series where we'd bring in academics that were talking about magnetism to inspire our team. And Professor Quentin Pankhurst, one of the founders of Endomag, came along to give a talk, and he presented on some of the ideas behind what became Endomag. And I remember looking at what he was doing at the time thinking, that's never going to happen. So Nanomagnetics died.
Yeah.
I ended up working for the company that he had founded. But it was a number of years in development, and I think critically they utilized the resources of the university, the relationships between the tech transfer office, the relationships between the university and the hospital, UCLH, to really advance this idea both clinically and technically, and get it to a stage where someone would jump in and lead
and be able to take it forward. Now, you joined with a lot of experience. I mean, you had 2 startups under your belt by that point. You had
Yes.
some time with CDT. Talk a little bit about the core skills and experience you felt you had under your belt by 2010, by the time you took this on.
So I think fundraising was one of them. So I had a lot of experience fundraising for the first company, and had a network and actually had a reasonable amount of credibility, despite the fact that first company wasn't a success. I had really stuck with that to try to ensure that it was a success, and pivoted a couple of times to try to rescue investor money, and because of that had some very strong supportive relationships that I knew I'd be able to go back into. Also, I had the first company that there wasn't a spinout of a university. I set this up during my PhD. There wasn't a tech transfer office. This was Nanomagnetics involved in data storage that I had set up basically in 1997. Pre-TTO at Bath University and Bristol. We were Amadeus's first and only, I think, seed investment, which didn't play out for them. So probably the only one they'll ever do. So I learned quite a lot through that. So I was doing that in the midst of my PhD. So I knew nothing about management. I knew nothing, I knew about project management. I knew about development, but didn't know about hiring people. Didn't know how to build a team. Had views on how to do it that were all sort of idealistic. We did pretty well despite that, but I kind of learned some of the limitations of my approach in terms of managing people. Also learned some limitations in terms of how I approached the strategy of taking a technology into an industry, in particular a new technology into the consumer electronics industry. And that's actually what ultimately took me to Cambridge Display Technology. As I was speaking to David Fife, who was the CEO at the time. We had known each other from events, conferences we'd be presenting at. And I went to him for advice when that first company, Nanomagnetics, had came to a halt, and said, you've had a great career. You've been at ICI, big companies, gone smaller. I've started out the wrong way around. I started in a small company, developed my own experience through that. Corporate research is disappearing. I don't know how to follow the trajectory that people would normally take. What would you do if you were in my position now? And he said, well, have you ever thought about working for CDT? And I said, no, I hadn't. So basically kind of offered me a job, even though they didn't have a position. But what was important about that is I was pretty embarrassed and depressed, having failed with the first company. And joining CDT was a chance to sort of stabilize. Here was a company that was NASDAQ listed. It was, had customers. It was growing. So there was some stability for me, for my wife. But also it was an interesting chance because it had a very similar approach, which was it was developing a technology that it wanted to license to manufacturers and consumer electronics. So it was, displays rather than data storage like Nanomagnetics. But what was interesting is I saw the strategic approach that I had with Nanomagnetics was the same approach being taken by CDT, and I could see the some of the challenges with getting that to work out. And they had managed to avoid some of the broader challenges. I'm happy to talk about those too. But it kind of it gave me a chance to revalidate myself. So I had kind of been ego destroyed from that first experience, feeling that I didn't know anything. I saw how a larger organization worked, saw some great things about how they organized and managed their organization, but also saw some things that I didn't like, that gave me a chance to sort of try out ideas or see how those ideas would play out in that organization, and really kind of refine what I thought it would take to make something work. And it was sort of that reflective experience that I had with CDT in the context of that first failure or first experience that allowed me to, I think, put the right puzzle pieces together when I joined Endomag.
Mm. Was it when you were looking or comparing the two, in terms of business model, in terms of strategic approach, was it a function of the decisions they were making? Was it a function of business model? Was it something else?
Yeah, it's partly business model and really understanding your customer. So it seems obvious in the case of a display industry that you know who your customers are. You know the Sonys, you know the Panasonics.
Sure.
Data storage, you know the IBMs, you know the Seagates, the Western Digitals. But that true customer understanding of how do they want to use this technology was one of the big challenges. So the first company, Nanomagnetics, we developed a liquid that offered the promise to really improve the capacities of the then technology, and actually the still technology, which is thin films evaporated in a vacuum chamber. And we understood what they wanted ultimately out of the product, but we hadn't really appreciated that they didn't want to change all that infrastructure that they had invested in to manufacture. And that if we were going to really try to break into that industry, we needed to integrate up to the first differentiable point, which is making a disc that fits into the supply chain. Cambridge display technology. Okay, we've got this polymer. We need to, and they had taken the steps to try to solve that problem. They partnered and worked with Litrex, a company in the U.S., to make big format printers. Tried to basically demonstrate that a printing technique would work for these display manufacturers, but a lot of the display manufacturers, what were they doing? They had big vacuum chambers and they'd evaporate material. And so to try to change them from their existing investments was a huge ask. And it's sort of natural to look to where could you make a differentiable product that could go into consumer electronics. And some of the areas that they did this early on when I joined and they had revenues was working with a lighting manufacturer, Osram, that made some small displays.
Yep.
And they made those displays. Those displays could go into products, and that was the aspect that worked. But clearly the big driver that everyone hoped to get to was to get into television panels, to cell phones, to
Absolutely.
iPads.
Yeah. So you joined Endomag in 2010, and you've accumulated these skills and this experience. And what proved to be the most valuable skills in those early days for you?
So I think the skill was initially, being able to research and analytical skills around understanding the space, because I had never done anything in the life science industry. I knew nothing about the regulatory environment. I knew nothing about breast cancer. And so to go from a career in consumer electronics into life science industry was a huge ask. Comes with a lot of ignorance. And actually, that's not a skill, but that was a characteristic that I had that actually I think was pretty valuable. In that I know that if I had had a background in life science industry or medical devices, I would have looked at our system, in particular a system that a surgeon uses to wave over the patient and to help find either primary tumor or lymph nodes involved in the spread of cancer, but also an injectable magnetic nanoparticle. Had I had experience, I would have expected that injectable to be a drug. And 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 this would be a drug device combination. But I really didn't know, was it a drug? Was it a device? And so it started with the first principles of, how are these things defined from a regulatory perspective? Someone that knew what they were doing would have automatically assumed, oh, this is a drug. It's got to be a drug. Regulators will say it's a drug, and they would take it forward as a drug. And it probably never would have existed had someone done that, because it would have needed to go through, developmental trials. No one probably would have funded that, and it would have run out of cash before it got started. But in speaking with our notified body, representing the regulators, asking the question of, having a discussion with them of, what makes a drug and what makes a device, and they said, well, related to the primary mode of action. Is the primary mode of action, is it immunological? Is it biological? Is it chemical? In which case it's a drug. If it's not, then it's a device. And I thought, ooh, that's quite powerful, because at the nanoscale, what is physical, what is chemical, and so was inspired to build up an argument about why this was a device, that it gets physically trapped in lymph nodes, filtered out, and that it's excited temporarily by this magnetic probe that creates a signal within these particles that you can then read back out and detect and localize them. And that was pivotal. Had that not gone our way, well, one, we would have run out of cash because our investors are sort of waiting to see that could be possible. But it was pivotal because it meant that we could get into clinic very quickly, and so that was, it was my ignorance that helped guide me on that path.
That's fascinating.
Or at least my
and that's not something. Yeah, but that's not something that had come up before. That's not something that had been thought of before by the founders, by the academics, by anyone else that was around the business at the time.
Correct. Yeah. People, they just knew it would need regulatory approval. They hadn't really thought through what that journey would be. They were, very, very much involved on that process with me, but it took me to be driving that and asking those questions.
But that's fascinating, that lack of experience and insight, and that inability to do the pattern recognition, which is why you often want that domain appreciation or insight experience. How not having that in these occasions can often lead to the more innovative breakthrough.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing, but that's sort of influenced how I've approached talent in general as we grew the organization. Is that
that's interesting.
If I use a meat analogy, I like rare talent, not completely raw, but not well done. Experience is a good thing, but too much of experience, it needs to, it's a fine balance. But I like people who have enough experience and good analytical capabilities, awareness of themselves, and want to prove something, because I found those to be people that really can grow effectively with an organization and hopefully ultimately lead teams.
At all stages of the company's development?
Pretty much at all stages of the company's development. Have tried some senior people at times, and find that experience is great, but it comes with other things. Sometimes it comes with people who are tired. They've had a great career, they've got a lot of experience, but they don't quite have the energy that it takes, or they have come from a larger organization and they've got a lot of infrastructure around them that they don't fully appreciate. And so when they go into a small company context, they don't perform that well because they don't remember that they were relying on additional people. And I've had, not just with Endomag, but sort of throughout my career, seen that where people can come in a bit too experienced and too experienced or too developed for the state of the organization that they're joining.
Yes. What were the key milestones for you along the journey? So you start in 2010. What was that first big key milestone moment for you? Do you remember?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was basically an existential crisis for the company. So when I joined, all they had was a device. So they had this product called the Endomag for detecting magnetic particles in the body, and it was pretty well down the productization path with the manufacturing partner. And I came in, uh, brought on a consultant to help set up a quality system to move towards getting that device its CE mark approval. But that device was only good if you use it to detect something and needed the something to detect. And at the time, strategically, everyone agreed where we wanted to get to was to have our own consumable that we could inject and localize. But that hadn't been done yet. And so the plan was clinically to use a material um, produced by a company, Gerbe, in France, that was making a contrast agent for MRI, but use it off label to inject and detect lymph nodes that be implicated in the spread of cancer. And so from the very start, I got in contact with them, said, this is what we want to do, want to build a relationship with you. And almost no sooner did we get the CE mark for our instrument, the Sentimag, than I get a call from the BD people at Gerbe saying, just wanted to let you know we are stopping manufacturing of our material, and the material that's out there clinically will expire by the end of March 2011. And so I thought, I think I've made a very big mistake because I'd left this nice stable job with Sumitomo Chemical that had acquired CDT. Told my wife, "Yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing this time with this startup," and we had a system and nothing to use it with, and so that was the very first crisis. Is basically I'd started um, had early started the process of identifying potential manufacturers. We thought Gerbe would be our partner. They were out. I flew around the world to anyone who was manufacturing anything that had ever been clinically approved, to source a material. Then also, this question of, well, what do we want to source? What's the right size? So doing some, clinical work at the same time to decide, what is the right, uh, criteria for us for acceptance tests. While also speaking with the regulators and having this discussion of, is it a device? Is it a drug? Being very fortunate at a time that one of the existing manufacturers of contrast agents, Shearing, was acquired by Bayer. And Bayer already had some contrast agents that were based on gadolinium, which has become the sort of favored contrast agent in the world of MRI. And Shearing had this iron oxide agent that the Bayer said, we don't need that anymore. And so I contacted the manufacturer, who had basically just lost one of their biggest clients, and said, would you be interested? We've got an application for that product. And it turned out that their product really met the design criteria that we had. Also, fortunately, they're our Japanese organization, and having worked for Sumitomo Chemical for a while, I understood how they operated. I felt a bit more familiar and a kinship with the Japanese organization in terms of taking a longer term view on building the relationship and growing a business. And so managed to secure a supply to that, managed to get it packaged, managed to get the regulators to review it and guide that it would be regulated as a medical device in Europe, and then got a CE mark by the end of 2011. So basically that was about
2 years. Yeah.
Well, no, it was 12 months.
Oh.
So I joined in June 2010. By the end of 2010, I had this news. And so 2011 was this running around the globe trying to sort this problem, and also try to raise some money to keep the show on the road as the sole employee. So that's kind of, I feel like that was my year that I really gave it all to Endomag.
That's crazy. Was it just primarily you at the time?
Yeah. I had a chairman that brought on that was from the space, super supportive. The founders were, involved.
Yep.
Some consultants, but yeah, I was the only full-time employee.
Was you.
It was me.
Holy cow.
Yeah. But, there's nothing like the risk of failure to make sure that
and the chip
leave
on your
no
shoulder
stone
from the
unturned.
last one.
Exactly.
As you saw it.
Yeah.
And
I had
so,
something to
right,
prove.
that's the first one. Exactly. And that's
to
so,
me,
I
really.
think that's so valuable. Yeah. But that's that's the audience for so many of these things that
Yes.
we're working on personally. It's always us. So that's the first key milestone. What do the milestones look like thereafter?
They don't get any less existential, but just kind of grow in magnitude. So at the end of 2011, basically it was halfway through 2011 that we got the notification that we could take this forward as a device. That released some investment, was able to then start building out the team. And really the way I wanted to build it out was to build a strong skeleton of executives who could wear the many hats that are required, had enough skills in the areas, but not too much, that they wanted to prove something as well. So brought on this person who's CTO and still CTO, and brought on a person who is Chief Operations Officer, still COO. They were director of technology and operations at the time because we needed to give them some space to grow. But they've stayed with the organization the whole time, and we kind of built out that way from the core out. And then they've now, the COO's got a team of 35 odd. The CTO's got a team of nearly 40 now. But coming back to what were the crises, what were the challenges that we had? Probably the next big one was the development of the next product. So we'd managed to commercialize with a distribution partner in Europe, and again another Japanese-owned business called Sysmex. We can come back and talk a little bit about that journey, but in terms of the challenge is that they were quite enthusiastic about our product. The market was enthusiastic, but they had sort of over-ordered from us. So we had a sort of peak year that then they had to sell down the next year. So our revenues do what a lot of early stage companies' revenues do, and sort of porpoise up and porpoise down and rumble around, which, despite the fact that we were generating revenues, it looked uncertain. And that created a challenging background to raise money at a time when we had developed a second consumable to address what we learned was an even bigger unmet need in the industry, which was, we were helping to find lymph nodes that were implicated in the spread of cancer. But surgeons were coming to us saying, oh yeah, we love that product, but do you know what we have to do to find, the primary tumor now and minimize the amount of healthy tissue we take? And they're like, oh, what's that? So, well, we have to, insert a wire, or the radiologist inserts a wire with a little barbed hook at the end. And that's done under image guidance. And then patient goes from radiology to surgery. And then we follow that wire down, cutting as we go until we get towards the end. And then we take out a ball of tissue. And in about a quarter of the cases, between the time that's placed and the time we do the surgery, that wire can move. And we end up having to bring back a quarter of these patients because we've taken out the wrong tissue or an insufficient level of tissue. And so if you guys could do something that would ensure that we go to the right spot and just take out the bit that we need and that part doesn't move, then that would be transformative. And so we developed a product and got that approved in the US in 2016. So strangely, it was a US approval easier than the European approval, because the regulations were continually changing and are still continually changing from country to country. And so we knew this was.
Do
you
you recall how that problem was identified within the company?
Yeah,
I mean, clearly by speaking with customers, but
yeah, really, that was it. Speaking with customers.
Yeah.
I'd love to say that we had whiteboarded this and looked at all of the feedback that we had had, but no, it came directly from customers saying, "Hey, dummies, I know you're doing this, but we've got this problem over here." And it probably took us a couple of those interactions before he said, "Oh, that's a good point." And then what we've developed over time is realized that, and part of the secret to our success is that our clinical customers, particularly the ones who adopt new technologies, are the ones that are leading not only clinically but academically. And so we'd kind of done this early on, but we started rolling it out to the whole of our organization to make sure the whole of our team understands the history of breast cancer management. What are the big papers? What are the big moments in history? What are the big innovations? And that we always stay current in that, because when we talk to customers, if we understand where they're coming from, we understand what's happening within that industry, they treat us collegially. And that makes development so much easier because they trust us to understand and develop their problems. And so it wasn't just going out and speaking to customers. It was really getting to understand our customers and trying to almost become our customers, as it were, so that we would be accepted within their midst. And it was those sorts of relationships that led us to that product.
Who's
But the big
having those
challenge.
discussions? Sorry, who's having those discussions from your side? Is it just the
So
commercial team, product teams,
it
everyone?
actually everyone.
Hmm.
Now, who makes the most of it? We have a market development team, we have a clinical team, have a technical team. But when we were small, e.g. sub 10 or sub 20 people, we would take everyone to a conference. We would put our CFO on the stand to talk to surgeons. Um, Absolutely, he hated it, but it was a chance to help reinforce what the company does for him. So it's not that we put him out for every single customer, but to get him on there, speak to the product. And after that first conference, we didn't, and we sort of did this early on and don't do this now because we've got such a large team. But he had come back from that first conference saying, "Oh, I really understand the business now. I thought we were in diagnostics or doing this or that." And the fact that he had to explain it, not just to his family or his parents, but to a surgeon, that level of discipline helped him really fundamentally understand the nature of the business. And I think that made us stronger. But but that's also something that our customers ultimately appreciated, was they know that the organization is really committed to understanding the challenges, understanding their needs, and working to develop them. And that's developing that relationship and that I guess reputation for how we work with those customers has really differentiated us in the market.
I mean, that's about culture, I'm guessing, an awful
Indeed.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you, and from discussions with other CEOs and entrepreneurs and executives, inculcating that kind of spirit, that sense of urgency, that willingness to be a partner to the community you're serving is what they're trying to do. Lots of people try it, few achieve it. How do you think you were able to make it happen?
That's a good question that I kind of wrestle with, because our mission is one that when people join the organization now, they all comment that they love we're setting out to make a difference. They understand it, and it's one thing to say you're setting out to make a difference, but when they come and interview and they meet people, they really feel that this organization is set up to do that. And I often, you know, it has grown organically, so it's difficult to really pick elements apart. But I think some elements of it are sort of passion across the team for what we're doing, but also a focus on education and educating ourselves. Um, and that, I talk about taking people out to a conference and having them discuss the products, but we've also had a couple of past presidents of the American Society of Breast Surgeons fly them over to talk to the whole company and take everyone through basically the development history of the standard of care in breast cancer in terms of surgery. And even our admin understands what does this ultrasound look like, why is this one concerning, why is this one not concerning. Not that they're going to go out and become ultrasonographers or anything, but we had this culture where we valued the space in which our customers were, understanding and learning how they do what they do, and understanding how we are a part of that process of advancing their practice.
Yeah.
So it's really
And
tying, that education process ties people's work
yeah,
to the outcomes. and helps provide that motivation.
And I suppose it, to an extent, because lots of companies talk about culture and they talk about the importance of serving their customer. One could be forgiven for getting the sense that they almost say it in an agnostic kind of way, as in, it's important to serve customers. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
But what you're doing with the education piece is making it more real. And, so it's not just the boss saying this. It's not just my line manager saying this. Not just going to another conference, which gives you a sense of that, a bit of spirit, a bit of energy. You get into it a little bit. But the education piece where thought leaders or academics or researcher or consultant surgeons are coming in to talk about how they're treating this on a regular basis. So I guess a bit of consistency is quite key there too.
Absolutely.
To constantly reinforce these messages. This is why we're here. We're here to make a difference to breast cancer. We're here to help solve the breast cancer challenge. That's why we exist. If that indeed is the mission of the company, but that's what we're doing here. And so I guess kind of gradually, slowly, then all at once, people start to believe, okay, no, this actually is really why we're here.
Yeah, and we continue those things to this day. Surgeons that are either based here in the UK or ones that are passing through, they like to come see us, visit our labs, talk about new products, get hands-on with the things that are going on. But we also take the opportunity to interview them and to try to disseminate that within the organization. Show them around, give people inside the organization a chance to speak to a customer and understand why what they're doing is valuable. At all levels, because I think that's one of the challenges as the company grows. The people that go out to the conferences are the sales and marketing team, and R&D may not get out there, or the quality team, the regulatory team might not get out there, and so they sort of become distanced from those great motivational events when customers say, "Oh, we love what you're doing. We love how you're doing this." And so to bring some of that back into the organization is critically important, particularly as it grows, because you can end up diluting one of the things that really helped make you differentiated.
I want to go back to a point you raised earlier. You mentioned that in terms of hiring practice, you've tended to go for the, let's say, perhaps not the most experienced hire, obviously not the most corporate hire, but people who were high quality generalists who could adapt well, who could work in a variety of different situations, who could problem solve. We hear of that profile. We draw up that profile quite a lot, obviously, for companies at the early stage.
Yeah.
It's, I guess it's less usual or less normal to hear about it at the more advanced stages. In that scenario, though, how do you build up credibility with that kind of audience? If you don't have that depth in the domain, if you don't have that expertise around breast cancer, or if you haven't been doing this for the longest period of time, because that boils down to trust and getting these people to trust you, forming this community, getting them coming back to you, and getting them to want to engage with you. A lot of that has got to come down to trust on their part. For some reason, they like dealing with you. They start to trust you, but you're not experts. So what's that secret?
A very interesting point, because it's one that vexed us in terms of fundraising, but benefited us in terms of customer engagement. So for years, we debated, do we need a scientific advisory board? Do we need a clinical advisory board? And maybe it's a consequence of the space that we play in, that quite often those can be quite political. So in spaces where this particular surgeon, has done this, and they've got these views. Well, they may have a cadre of people that, they're all on team X, but there's a team Y that thinks that person's a complete jerk and doesn't know what they're doing. And so we've kind of shied away from using experts. Not that we haven't engaged with customers and tried to, figure out who is sort of more valued as an opinion leader. But if we had gone out and brought people in, we could have limited our audience by, in a sense, the political affiliations that come with people, particularly the people who maybe get involved with industry. You'll have these surgeons who will be on every trial for every new device, and the industry, well, the clinical industry, as it were, says, "Oh, they're just a shill for industry. We don't take what they say." So if you get them on board, then you might think you've got an advocate, but really, you're sort of relegated to another one of those companies that just is paying this person off.
And you hear this from partners or potential customers?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's interesting.
And so the way
that's reinforcing the need again to be speaking to your customers and partners on a regular basis, even about stuff like this.
Absolutely. And yeah, so every time we go to a conference now, and it started informally, we just have a social meal with some of these surgeons who just liked us because we were different than other companies out there. We had educated ourselves about the space they were in. We were able to talk about current issues. We were able to understand, technically, what they were doing. Not that we were surgeons, but we knew enough to have a conversation. And they were like, "Well, I'd rather go hang out with these interesting people compared to, some, we'll go to that big, J&J or Medtronic soiree just to, have some free nibbles. But we'd rather hang out with those Endomag people because they're really interesting. We can grab a drink and really chat through things." And so we fostered that type of interaction. And through the internal education side, and particularly when it came to us building our own sales teams and market development teams, we put everyone through a rigorous education process with a Viva. And if they don't survive that, they don't stay around. Because we found that if they get through that process, the credibility is there. It's not that they need to be, that someone says, anoints them as, these people are knowledgeable. They can just go out into the field and people see that they can communicate. And we've built a reputation, and so they come with that a bit. But if they continue to show the qualities that we try to imbue, that gives them the credibility. So we've rolled our own, as it were, partly by necessity because of the political nature of clinical field, at least the clinical field that we're in.
Yep. Wow, that's remarkable. I haven't heard that before. Where you've created your own education program. In the bigger companies, yes, I know that they take on these sorts of things, but in a younger company, this level,
and even for the bigger companies, Hologic were really surprised. Yeah. And I think when they originally approached us, they were just interested in the products. But the more they got to understand the company, they said, actually, one of the comments they had was, "We hate selling against you in the field because your customers are so damn loyal." And they even think that they prefer something else technically, but they'll stick with you because they believe in the company. And that is a core element of value that we built. And I don't know whether that's generally applicable to other companies. I often think, how would I do this if I were in a different industry? What's the equivalent here? But it has been super powerful for differentiating us.
How early were your first revenues?
First revenues were in 2012. So we got our CE mark for the Endomag instrument at the end of 2010, when I found out we don't have anything to use it with. CE mark for the thing to use it with, MagTrace, at the end of 2011. It was clear that we could not build our own sales team. It was a big challenge, and the value, all the things, I've talked about the things that we've done that help differentiate us, but we could have not achieved all these things without a variety of partnerships, supply chain or distribution or otherwise. And so one of the earliest relationships that even goes back to 2010 was with this diagnostics company called Sysmex, a Japanese firm, but we met with the European side of them. And they had developed a diagnostic system for analyzing lymph nodes in breast cancer, particularly to basically interoperatively during the surgery take out a lymph node, pop it in this machine, and it would tell you whether it's cancerous or not. So rather than doing the surgery and waiting for a week for the pathologist to come back and say, oh yeah, there's cancer in these nodes, you need to bring the patient back and take out the rest of the lymph nodes, they could do this while the patient's still on the table and, save the pain of a follow-up surgery. And so they analyzed the lymph nodes. We had a way to find the lymph nodes, met them at a conference. They said, oh, we should talk. And so we started talking. And they took a chance on us. They basically said, we're really excited by what you're doing. We think there's an opportunity here. And so we chose for them to be our distribution partner across EMEA, gave them exclusivity. But in order to get that deal on the road, they wanted certainly more than 10 patients and a prototype device. So we had these two approved devices. We were running a trial, which we thought would be the trial to end all trials. 150 patients using the standard of care, using radioisotope versus our mag trace material, and showing that we had the same outcomes, or at least non-inferior outcomes. And they said, okay, we'd love to see some of the early pull of the data, and based on that, then we might sign to this agreement. But despite having put a data review point in that agreement, the academic partners who were involved in that said, no, we're not going to share this information with a commercial partner. And so it was sort of dragging on, and they were interested enough. They said, listen, we're just going to take some of your devices. We'll do our own evaluation. And so they basically ran the equivalent trial that finished about the same time as our trial. Again, 150 patients, and saw non-inferiority to the standard of care, but it had all these upsides of, a simpler supply chain. You could use it in any rural setting. Yep. You don't need nuclear medicine. And that was enough to convince them to sign an agreement. And so in 2012, they bought their first systems from us, and we started, commercializing across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And that relationship continues to this day, although we terminated the exclusive arrangement at the end of 2022. So in 23, we took certain countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Nordics, yep, direct, because we felt that we had advanced such that our teams could do a better job. Partly because their teams did a great job, but they were selling diagnostic equipment to pathologists, not surgery systems to surgeons. And so it became clear that we felt we could do a better job. We had an amicable parting of the ways, but then we had to, post-Brexit, do a lot of infrastructure setting. We had not been doing direct sales at all until 2023, and we were, by that stage, 80 odd, close to 100 people, and didn't have customer care, didn't have all the logistics, didn't have a third-party warehouse. There was a lot to implement, leading to January 2023, and that was probably I skipped over or kind of missed your second big crisis, which was going to the U.S. This was the third crisis, which is going direct in Europe. It wasn't a crisis, but big challenge. Yeah. Happy to pick.
Did it prove to be the right move? Did
Absolutely.
it prove? Yeah,
100%. It stepped up the level of our organization's professionalism to the right degree at the right time. It was a big challenge, it was a big lift for us, but putting in a customer care team, setting up a warehouse, getting logistics, getting the systems in place so that those groups could talk to one another, are things we had poked at in the past, and this sort of was the forcing function to get all of that stuff established. And I was really proud of how our team was able to do that. And when the taps turned on January 1st, 2023, it was a question of, have we done all the right things? Were we missing anything? And to go from what was sort of quarterly orders and quarterly revenues to daily revenues, and having that sort of cadence, I'm glad that we waited until then to do that. But now that we had done that, it was hugely transformative business, and I think that was one of the big, accelerators in terms of valuation that we had.
Yeah.
When it came to
having your own sales team, having your own commercial team. Yeah.
And having all the parts in place. and see how that'd scale.
Yeah. It's interesting you say just the level of professionalism it brought the rest of the organization to having that commercial team in-house and the
Yes.
kind of impact it had on the rest of the group. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Where did you see the impact the most?
Um, it's a good question. Where do we see it the most? I mean, certainly in growth of revenues, that was an immediate impact.
Yeah.
I think it was also an impact across how the organization worked together. So as you go through these sort of periods of scaling, where people are wearing multiple hats, sometimes you have to cut people's hat in half and say, okay, this is where you focus, and this is where you're going to focus. And so transitioning from using distributors to having a direct team means that you have different teams involved in more of the process. And those interdepartmental relationships can change because responsibilities sort of change, and people feel like part of their function is being taken away from them. So even though we've expanded and professionalized, you're telling some people, oh, you now have to focus on this narrow aspect, and that can be a negative impact because people loved having visibility across all of these other things, and you're telling them to just stick to this narrow lane because we've got this other team here that's professionalizing the customer interaction. They're like, well, were we bad with customers? No, you were fine with customers, but you need to focus on this side, and we've got these other people to do that. So it was probably the more fundamental impact was just the intradepartmental impacts across the organization, and trying to help people realize that we weren't minimizing their contribution. We were just, working in a much more defined and distributed way to scale the organization.
You mentioned that going to the
Sorry.
You mentioned that going to the US was a huge challenge as well. Why?
So the 2016, this new product that we had developed to replace the wire that I mentioned, a product called MagSeed, we got that approved by the FDA. And we knew that that was going to be a strong product in the US. The challenge was that we didn't know what route. We'd gone in Europe with this distribution or strategic distributor relationship. For North America, what we wanted to do was try our hand at being direct. We weren't going to go direct across the US all from day one, but wanted to focus in a state where we already had a lot of clinical relationships with hospitals. And so we chose the state of Texas because we already had some systems at MD Anderson, had some in Dallas. Texas, quite a big state, a lot of diversity in terms of hospitals and payers. And so what we were going to do is try to build up a mini direct team in the state of Texas to get our feet wet, to then use that to decide whether we partner to distribute in the US or whether we can demonstrate enough that we can then scale that organization. But I mentioned about our early revenues being sort of porpoisey. We'd have a big up where they ordered a lot, but then they had overordered versus their customers, and so even though our revenues had shot up and theirs were pretty steady, we had to wait until they caught up with the customers before they'd order again. And with that background, despite the fact that we were growing in terms of clinical utility, our revenues looked a bit questionable, and so we struggled to raise money to build that mini direct team in the US. And that put us on a path to basically use the same strategy we'd used in EMEA, which was find a strategic partner that could act as our distributor. And so we actually partnered with effectively our competition. So the largest manufacturer of the systems to detect radioisotopes, which is the competing technology to do a sentinel lymph node biopsy, we said, well, hey guys, you just make that instrument. It's just a capital sale. You don't control the consumables. It's pretty diffuse supply chain on that side. what we have is we've got consumables, one to do a sentinel lymph node biopsy, one to find the primary tumor, and this instrument. If you replaced your global installed base with our systems, that could be generating, $500 million a year in terms of consumable revenues. And they're like, this is interesting. For us, it was interesting, to access their installed base. For them, it was interesting to access the consumable revenues. And so we partnered with a company called MedTech, which is part of Danaher, to act as our distributor. And at that time, we were raising money and struggled to raise money, and so they basically partnered with us to make an investment, which suddenly convinced our own investors that maybe this was a good thing. And then we closed the round that we were seeking to close at the time. But that really set us on the path to using their existing infrastructure to commercialize in the U.S. But it wasn't necessarily smooth sailing. And what we found was that, as you'd expect, if all their sales team was doing capital sales, the fact that they've now got a consumable meant that their motivations, their compensation was slightly misaligned from strategizing towards optimizing for Endomag's technology. And then also, like many corporate relationships, people move on. And, some of the people we originally did the deal with had moved on. New people came in. Those new people come out. New people come in. And the rationale for the original, arrangement changes. And so we started putting our own people in to support them. Even though we couldn't sell directly, we could support the sales because we didn't feel that they were, addressing the market the way that we wanted. And so that has been a big challenge. And that's kind of the context in which we were acquired, which was, we have this team of people in the US growing the business or supporting the growth of the business, but we aren't able to grow directly. We saw the value of going direct in Europe and the impact that had. And we wanted to find a way to have that impact in the US. And as it so happens, Hologic, they've got, an excellent sales organization, and they were able to, acquire the company and will be, taking our products direct. So we, they'll see the benefit of that growth that we expect in the US. We couldn't have done it without MedTech. They were, a great partner. That original deal motivator for them and for us. We could have easily run out of money had they not done that. And some great people, helped us commercialize. But it was also, you hear so many horror stories about the US. That wasn't easy, but at least it wasn't a complete horror show.
Yes. I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
What skill did you not have when you went into this role that you feel you've developed as part of this engagement?
I think communication, hopefully this comes across, the potential irony of saying this, but my ability to communicate has improved dramatically. It's not that I wasn't able to communicate with the early companies, communicating, complicated technology and to customers, but it's more than that sort of technology translation ability. It's more about distilling the complex for investors, about abstracting what our teams learn and sharing that throughout the organization in different modes of communication, and in honing my skills to find the right way to communicate to the right people and to understand the information such that I can be an effective communicator. And that was something that I feel has taken years to develop. Not that it's perfect, but it's better than it was. But I think that's an essential skill for me today. And I think one of the things that has made me at least successful within our organization. And I think if you pulled anyone out of the team or anyone out of our partners, what is the thing that they feel positively about me is my understanding of the organization and ability to communicate it.
That's there's a lot of gold in that piece, that communication piece for all of the focus on all sorts of different skills. But for leadership, it still comes down to communication. And that ability to find the right form of words with the right audience and articulate it in the right way so that it's understood, so that it resonates. And it sounds so simple, sounds so basic. It's so hard.
We still have this. We do, our engagement surveys with the organization. And one of the things that still comes back, one or two people say, I don't know what the strategy is. And, we have town halls. We've got, a mixed leadership team that goes throughout the organization. I even stand up in town halls and say, listen, if anyone doesn't understand the strategy or has any questions, I'm happy to, just book an hour with me. I'll sit down with you. Doesn't matter who you are. I don't have my own office. We're all sort of open plan, very open environment, very communicative. But even with all of that, still people don't get all the answers that they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Last question, Eric. That chip that you had on your shoulder when you started this.
Yeah.
Is it still there?
I think it sort of still is. I feel like, having had this exit, it was a textbook exit, great returns in a really difficult environment. I looked through the list of all the things that we had, but, and it's not imposter syndrome. Even though, occasionally I'll have that. When I reflect on myself, I realize, oh yeah, I've learned a lot in all of these decades, and I feel really confident in my skills. But there's an element of always thinking, I could have done that better, or I wish I had made this decision then, which is probably not a healthy. I think it drove me earlier, and it's probably a healthy thing to get rid of. So I'm hoping that chip is maybe just a nice level of scar tissue, no longer a chip.
Yeah. Would you dive back into it again? Go do another one at some point?
I would. But I've got a great opportunity. I mean, Hologic has, one of I think the nicest things about, you'd asked about the exit earlier, and it was a great exit for a couple of reasons. One is, it's textbook for the investors, got back what they were hoping for. The board is happy. Our team is happy. But the thing our team is happy about the most, and what I'm happy about the most, is Hologic has recognized what we've built as more than just a product. That we've got this culture that was so deep they hadn't appreciated when they first approached us. And they're also, they're a lot larger than us, but they're also still going through their growing pains, and they see a lot in us that they would like to absorb. And so they said, this is, even though we're doing an integration, they kind of want to reverse integrate some aspects of what we have. They recognize that we've got an advantage when it comes to innovation, and that we innovate on a global basis. We focus on products from a global perspective, whereas they have traditionally focused on a U.S. perspective, U.S. products for U.S. customers, whereas we're global products for global customers. And so they're turning Endomag into their, global innovation center for breast surgery. And so we've got a much broader remit for new products, potentially for, business development, doing inorganic as well as organic developments, and have asked me to, stay on and lead that. So for me, it's the perfect exit, in that if I had written down all the things I'd want, it's to be able to keep doing what we're already doing, but do it at a much larger scale. It's great to get the exit alongside that, but to be able to continue to drive this organization and do so much more for more patients around the world is perfect. But if they get tired of me, if I get tired of this somehow, I still have the energy. I feel like I still want to. It's like I've proved to myself that I can take something out of a university and commercialize it. And that was the original goal. I just wanted to prove to myself I could do that. And then the bar just kept changing as time went on. But now there's part of me that says, okay, well, you had a lucky break here. Can you do it in another field? Are the things that you've learned really applicable, or did you just get lucky and you just hired the right people? So I kind of feel like maybe that's the scar tissue from the chip. Is I feel like I need to do it again just to prove to myself that I actually did know what I was doing rather than just getting lucky.
Yeah, that's no bad thing. Eric, thank you so much. I have freaking loved this. I have
Chris,
really loved this. I have learned a ton. It's been super interesting, super insightful. So thank you so much.
No, really appreciate it, Chris. Good to chat with you, and good to see you again.
You've been listening to the LabToMarket Leadership Podcast, brought to you by DeepTech Leaders. This podcast has been produced by Bauhaus. You can find out more about us on LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.